we're having some electrical problems in our house, so that my nice warm basement is no longer my nice warm basement. But yesterday I was talking to my student, Mikhail Boysenko, who was speaking to me from a mall in Kiev. And he was bundled up. And so any self-pity I might have gets put aside when I think of Mikhail and his family, who are under constant threat of attack. And he has an incredible spirit that he, keeps positive, not in a superficial way, but in a very sincere way. And when I asked him about teaching, he kind of was saying, he's teaching, he's doing what he can so that he can be doing something good, not to be just, living your life under this dread. So I will put any of my own concerns aside. And, we are, I guess we can talk about it when we get to it, but, been reading from my book, A Burning Desire. There's a few things I can say. Thoughts arriving. And we've been on step 2, and we're on the last piece of step 2 in there. And so the book only covers, it has a section called Dharma God, which talks about the Dharma as powers, different aspects of the Dharma as powers. And then it talks about the 6 of the 12 steps that mention God or higher power. The second step is actually the first one of the 12 steps that mentions higher power. Anyway, I'll talk about it when we get there, I guess. So we're gonna meditate for 20 minutes, and then I'll talk and I'll read and talk. Maybe not in that order. Maybe both at the same time, who knows? So it's nice, people are showing up. I do think this is a time of year when we all depend on our community and our practice, maybe more than other times. So I'm glad people are appearing. So they continue to appear. Monica and I are admitting people from the so-called waiting room, which is actually not a room at all. But anyway, okay, let's sit. And I'll just share like the thing that struck me this morning when I was doing my sit earlier. I just noticed, boy, and this is something, I don't have great posture in general or in meditation, but I tipped my head to what it felt like I was tipping it back. And it's probably upright rather than, like I think my normal posture is kind of like slumped, and that feels natural. So, and I felt a completely different energy, physically, emotionally, just getting my head into the right spot. So just another one of those like subtle little things about our practice that we can tune in to how you're holding your body. And sometimes experiment when you're right in the middle of a meditation and you're like, what's going on? Like, I'm feeling weird. Try just like, let me put my shoulders back more, or whatever it might be. Maybe you need to relax more. Maybe you need to tip forward more. Maybe you're somebody who gets rigid and pushes back, but experiment with your posture. I recommend that. And notice if there's a spot where it kind of feels like, ooh, everything is kind of like moving up my spine now, and really uh, in a beautiful alignment. Uh, okay, so you can close your eyes or just lower your gaze, turning the attention inward and feeling your body sitting. Releasing any tension, seeing if you can find any ways to relax while still staying upright and alert. Softening the belly, releasing the shoulders, relaxing the jaw, feeling the body breathing. And then connecting with the breath as a core element of your meditation. You can feel the breath as just movement in the body. Feel it as touch, the air at the nostrils, in and out. You can feel it as a whole process, breathing in, breathing out. And being with the breath is a way of naturally calming the body, interrupting thoughts, and then calming the mind. It's not that thoughts automatically stop when we start to feel the breath, rather that we keep returning to the breath when we notice the mind drifting. And then each time we return is reinforcing that presence, that connection. It diffuses the energy of thinking. When we're mindful of thoughts, we notice how trivial many of our thoughts are. And then it's not difficult to let them go. You realize, I don't need to be thinking this right now. It's fine to let it go and just come back to the simple experience of breathing that returns me to the present moment. That brings me back to the essence of life, of being. Not doing, not making, not creating. And the Zen expression is shikantaza, just sitting. It's actually considered to be somewhat advanced practice. When we practice mindful breathing, we can easily see how challenging it is to just get to a place where we are just sitting. But it's a good kind of marker or experience to point to. It can help us to arrive there by just hearing that idea, just sitting. Just letting the attention rest with the simplest experience of breathing, the experience of sitting. There's nothing dramatic about these experiences. Nothing magical. And yet their very simplicity can help the mind come to stillness. Neither pleasant nor unpleasant. Peaceful. And it takes a subtlety of attention to appreciate peace, to appreciate simplicity. Once this is cultivated, it begins to have a special allure for us. We see its preciousness. All right. I'm going to grab a shawl. Just a moment. I got to practice awareness of sensation in my legs. Cold is a funny, it's perception is so interesting when, because ordinarily we don't have any problem like going, oh, I'm cold, I can put something on. But just sitting here, because of being more mindful and very present, the sensation, it didn't immediately like register as cold. It just registered as, sensation in the legs. Just always interesting to me when we start to bring attention into these different experiences that we sort of have ordinary ways of perceiving, and then in a meditative state that we check them out and realize, oh, like that's just one version of it. Because it wasn't that cold, it wasn't really so unpleasant. It didn't really register as unpleasant, it just registered as a sensation. And then I was thinking, why are my legs cold and nothing else is cold? I'm like, oh, hot air rises. I remember that from 4th grade. Okay. So I was listening to Ajahn Amaro yesterday, and again, I can't recommend enough. If you have Spotify or really any podcast, if you listen to podcasts, just go in there and search for Ajahn Amaro, and they've got a podcast of him, which is his, it's his Dharma talks. And it's not a podcast in the traditional sense of like, it's not recorded as a podcast. And unfortunately, the questions that people ask are not picked up on the microphone. So I've been thinking about writing a complaint, but I don't like to complain to my teachers. In any case, he was talking about Buddhadasa Bhikkhu, or Ajahn Buddhadasa. So I have talked about him before, and I will talk about him again. He was a Thai forest monk, really one of the really transformative figures of 20th century Buddhism. His name, if you know the name Ram Dass, the Ram Dass means servant of God. Ram is like a Hindu god, right? So Das means servant. So you can see Buddhadasa's name means servant of Buddha, but just, I like that. Anyway, he was, I think he died in the early 90s, and he was probably 90 by the time. So he lived most of the 20th century. And Ajahn Amaro was talking about things I did not know about him. Apparently, he was really precocious as a monk. By the time he was 16, he was being asked to give Dharma talks and because he was just really brilliant. And but what was important about him, and the reason I'm talking about him is he's related to this book, Burning Desire. The term Dharma God comes from Buddhadasa, so that just for you to know why we'll come back to this book, but I want to talk about him a bit, because for one thing, I want you to look into him, to pursue him. He has a bunch of great books. Theravadan Buddhism, which is the stream, the tradition that I'm really closest related to, it's mainly practiced in Burma, Thailand, Sri Lanka, and other bordering areas, sometimes called Southern Buddhism. For a long time, the focus was on the commentarial teachings rather than the actual suttas, the original teachings from the Buddha. So the commentaries, particularly the Visuddhimagga, which means the path of purification, that was put together about 1,000 years after the Buddha, but it kind of, well, I don't even want to characterize it except to say that it was an attempt to sort of systematize and bring forth the teachings without having to go back and look at the suttas. And so many monastics and thus Buddhists in the Theravada tradition over the last 1,500, 2,000 years were more led by the commentarial tradition and the commentaries. But there became this movement, and I'm sure that during that time it went back and forth to some degree, that the sutras certainly didn't get lost or forgotten. But in any case, the early 20th century was a time when the commentarial tradition was dominant. And Buddhadasa was one of the figures who said, let's go back and look at the suttas. The suttas are what the Buddha taught. Let's not depend on someone who lived 1,000 years after the Buddha to tell us what he was teaching. And so that makes him a really important figure in modern day Buddhism. And as many of you know who have heard me talking about the suttas, this is something that I find the suttas themselves very inspiring. And my book Living Kindness is based on sutta teachings. So, but another quality of Buddhadasa, probably something that really characterized him as a personality and a figure, was that he was really iconoclastic. He did not listen to his elders. Pretty much, he was ostracized from the Bangkok hierarchy of Buddhism in Thailand, and went off and opened his own monastery in southern Thailand, which is still there, called Swan Mak. You can go there. They hold open 10-day retreats every month. I know people have been there. And so, where Ajahn Chah and Ajahn Amaro and most of the Thai forest monks were in the north of Thailand. I've never been to Thailand, but I know a little bit about how. So the north is Chiang Mai and Chiang Rai, the provinces, and so Buddhadasa was kind of off on his own, doing his own thing, but he was very much, Ajahn Amaro says he was very much in the kind of similar tradition as the Thai forest monks, trying to get back to the roots of Buddhism. And Ajahn Amaro says that Ajahn Chah, who was Ajahn Amaro's first teacher and was Jack Kornfield's teacher, another really towering figure of modern day Buddhism and Thai Buddhism, that he had one picture up on the wall of his kuti where he lived, and it was a picture of Buddhadasa. That's pretty striking to me, says a lot. So yes, so then the importance of him, direct importance in my practice, my teaching, is that he gave a series of lectures on Christianity and Buddhism in, I think, 1967, called something like the Sinclair Memorial Lectures or something like that. And here is where a lot of the original ideas I got around Buddhism and God kind of come from. And I talk about that in One Breath at a Time and in this book. So I just thought, because I was listening to Ajahn Amaro yesterday, and I thought I would just bring that stuff up. The Buddhadasa's influence on this. And when Ajahn Amaro first saw the title to this book, A Burning Desire, the subtitle is Dharma, God, and the Path of Recovery, his comment was, "There's no comma between Dharma and God?" And I said, "No." He was like, "Oh, so you're following Buddhadasa?" I was like, "Yes." So there you go. So as I was, so where we are, and I mentioned this before, the meditation is in step 2, and this is the very last section on step 2, and I tell some of the story here that it is something that I often refer back to when people ask me to, when I get interviewed or I'm on a podcast or something, and they're saying, "Well, tell us about how you started to connect Buddhism and the 12 steps." And it often arrives back at some of what's in this piece here. So it's worth reading. This starts on page 148. It's just 2 pages, a little over 2 pages. It's called Losing God, Finding Buddha. During the first 7 years of my recovery, I didn't worry much about philosophy, how the process worked, or figuring it all out. I continued to practice Buddhist meditation, but I didn't see how it was connected to the steps, other than step 11, which specifically suggests meditating. In fact, in my limited vision, I thought of Buddhism as in conflict with the steps, the God stuff, powerlessness, inventory. Somehow I couldn't see the connection. All I knew was that I loved Buddhism and the practice, and I loved and needed the steps and recovery. I was also in therapy, which I didn't know how to connect to the other 2 either. So I thought of all 3 of these supports as a 3-legged stool, separate but working together to hold me up. But recovery and spiritual development are not static processes. Many people, after solving the major addictions issues in their lives, start to go through other experiences. Sometimes people have a spiritual crisis at 5 or 10 years sober. Others, of course, go back to drinking or drugging when they think they've, quote, recovered, unquote. Many people I've met feel in early recovery that they're being held or carried by some spiritual power, but that as they age in sobriety, that special feeling dissipates. Some wind up feeling spiritually barren or become atheists or cynical and bitter. This is a critical point in recovery. Perhaps this kind of crisis occurs because once the surface wounds of addiction are healed, the deeper traumas begin to surface. Some addiction professionals these days point to early trauma as being a cause of addiction. And while I think it's hard to generalize about that, I do think that there are layers of healing that have to happen to stay sober. Is it childhood trauma, accumulated pain of addiction, genetic baggage, or even accumulated karma from past lives? I certainly don't know. And I don't think it's as important to figure out the causes as it is to have tools for healing and recovery. The 12-step literature says that we should use whatever other help we need and draw from professionals or spiritual teachers for guidance in our recovery. For many people, I think this is vital. While it's true that some find the steps, meetings, literature, and fellowship to be enough support for anything they go through in recovery, others have crises that call for further help. Unfortunately, this is sometimes because some aspect of the program, especially the God part, becomes alienating. Some people start to feel disconnected from meetings and the fellowship, while others may feel betrayed by a sponsor or a sober friend. Whatever precipitates a crisis in recovery, whether it's anxiety, depression, alienation, or spiritual disconnection, if we don't address it, we risk not only our sobriety, but our very lives. Earlier, I described my own crisis, losing the ability to pray to an external God while I was on a self-retreat at 7 years sober. I was fortunate that I had a core practice to guide me through this time. In fact, it was then that my Buddhist practice began to come back to me, to become more central in my life. I'd always known how important it was and how special the teachings were, but for those early sober years, I also knew I just needed to get my life together to learn how to live a normal life. Once that was established, though, my hunger for something deeper was aroused. Although I'd already been practicing Buddhist meditation for 12 years at that time, in some ways I consider that turning point to be the real beginning of my practice. Prayer to God became less important, while the direct experience of presence became more prevalent. I started to finally make the Buddhist connection with the steps as my spiritual life became integrated. Over time, I came to see how all the powers associated with God were contained in the Dharma, and I arrived at what can be called Dharma God. Does this mean that I never think of God as external or magical anymore? No, there are still times, especially in moments of despair or fear, when I feel disconnected from everything. And in those moments, God is outside me, at least separate from the overwhelming painful consciousness I'm caught in. So it makes sense to pray to him at that time. Ultimately, the concept of God is something we use. The steps are very practical, and that's my approach too. How can I use the concept of God to help me in this moment? That's the question I ask, and then I use whatever concept is most useful. You might see that as inconsistent with my beliefs, but beliefs are inconsistent. They develop, they change, they evolve, they backtrack. Like the 12-step program, the Buddha was very practical. He said that it wasn't really necessary to know everything about the creation of the universe and how karma works and all the other mysteries in the world. Instead, he focused on suffering and the end of suffering. We could say on addiction and recovery. What causes suffering and how can I end it? That's what he wanted to know. It's what he figured out, and it's what he taught. As I've said, one of the things that causes us suffering is being attached to our views and opinions. In other words, our beliefs. As our understanding of God evolves, these beliefs change. Sometimes that happens easily and smoothly. Other times it precipitates a crisis in our lives. If we can see that coming to believe is an ongoing process, one that may continue to the end of our lives, then we may not struggle so much or worry about whether we are believing the right thing or that our beliefs are true. Ultimately, I think we should be most concerned not about the accuracy of our beliefs, but about their efficacy. Oftentimes, I can't know if they are true, but I can usually tell if they are helping me or not. And that's what I want to know. Are my beliefs leading to the end of suffering? That's a pretty damn good piece of writing, if I do say so myself. I like that. A few things. One thing I'll notice is the word crisis or crises shows up a lot in this section. So, clearly that's like the underlying thing that I'm trying to address. And, as I'm writing this, and I wrote most of this, I think, in 2008. The book was published in 2010. Took a while for the publisher to get it together. Maybe some of it was 2009. But I feel like as I'm writing it, I feel like I'm having this conversation that's a little bit of an argument, that I'm kind of like with these people that are like fighting with me about, they're like, I don't believe in God, there is no God. So And there's no higher power to turn my will and my life over to. And and so I'm trying to say, look, don't be so attached to your beliefs. First of all, don't like. I really like this sentence that even is poetic. I think we should be most concerned not about the accuracy of our beliefs, but about their efficacy. Like, what are they doing? Why do I make myself a victim of my beliefs? Oh, I believe that there's no God, so I'm gonna just be whatever. I don't care. Like, believe what you want, but what's it doing for you? And when people become, trapped in a belief system that's causing them pain, and I'm not saying, oh, we'll believe in something else. I'm just saying maybe don't be so like caught in that. That this is like one of the main things the Buddha talks about. Causing suffering is attachment to beliefs, views, and opinions, as I said here. At the end of the Metta Sutta, the Buddha's teachings on loving kindness, he says, by not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desires, is not born again into this world. By not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one, so there's a connection between your heart and your views, and notice like how when you're attached to your views that there's a tightness. It's like a tightness in your heart, right? It's holding you down. It's keeping you in a corner. So, really what I'm trying to get people to do is say, how can I make this step work? What's the use of this step? Do I need it? How can it be beneficial for me? Rather than, those 12 steps, they're like, and telling me all the negative things about them. I was just reading a post on Facebook. I don't know why, but I was caught. About but I'm not powerless. That's making me a victim or whatever. And the whatever God and character defects, and telling us all what's wrong with the language of the steps. It's like, I hear you, I get it. But let's figure out if there's something in there that's pointing to something useful rather than throwing out. Because it was interesting, like in this particular post, it was like, no, addiction is caused by trauma. And I'm like, okay, so in that way, you're not a victim? Like, how is that different from powerlessness? If you're saying like, oh, I was traumatized and that's why I became an addict. It's like, well, you didn't create the trauma, right? So you didn't have control over that. So thus powerless. I was also struck by the fact that, when I wrote this, as I said, 13 or 14 years ago, I was acknowledging this thing about trauma, and I trauma is part of it. It's part of the story, but it's a very limiting view of where addiction comes from. I know from my own story, I was talking to someone else in recovery, but like neither of us identify trauma. For me to say I was traumatized would be like I had parents. Yeah. And I didn't get everything I wanted. And they had problems. My parents had problems. Yeah. That's what traumatized me. It's like, well, okay, then now really what we're saying then is being a human is traumatizing. I agree. And that's why the Buddha said there's this first noble truth that life is unsatisfactory. Oh, okay. So, but then that makes you think, well, then why isn't everybody an addict? All right, never mind. I'm getting lost. I'm having an argument with people that aren't here. So, I guess that's it. I think that's it for now. I'll just open it up and see if anybody has a comment or anything they want to add in here. And thanks for listening, by the way. And thanks for the thumbs up there, Jasmine et al.
Morning, Kevin.
Mike, hi.
Hey, hi, everybody. Yeah, this is really good. I think this may be your swan song here, Kevin. This idea of not being victim to our beliefs. This is really good. I felt like when I came back into recovery, I felt like the first time I left, I was kind of a victim of my beliefs. And when I came back, I just, I'm an atheist or an agnostic, and I was just, I came back into AA first, and I was just like, I'm just not going to get hung up over this time and get screwed up with all the God stuff. And I kind of feel you kind of nailed it here with, just the efficacy of it. You just don't want to get caught up in your beliefs in a way that, will screw up your recovery. And I kind of felt like that happened the first time around. So this was good. Thanks for this talk this morning.
Yeah, thank you. Again, I'm going to refer to this in that piece about how the Buddha was like, you don't need to know everything. You don't have to have all the answers to every question that your mind can come up with in order to have a spiritual growth or transformation, and it's that practicality of it, just asking what's useful for me. Mary Helen, hi.
Hi, Kevin. I'm just needing to say some words about the family patterns of alcoholism. I'm going out to visit my brother. I'm learning more about the struggles and flailing of a 16-year-old granddaughter. And when we talk about, well, what's the cause of alcoholism? There is a strong indication that there's some genetic predisposition. And we don't have to really understand it all or have all the genes sequenced to see the patterns there. And what I'm finding really important for me about my meditation practice is that I need to find a way to just be present with what I'm seeing in my in my family. And some of it is hard and threatening their survival. And I just want to be with them without being part of the problem. And my meditation practice has been really sustaining me through that. So thank you.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I like the way it's like we can also take this idea of our views and opinions into our relationships. And what does it, how do we create, avoid conflict in our relationships by not having to take a stance on every issue, live and let live. Another one of the signs on the wall of the AA meeting, right? Monica, hi.
I was still starting to zone out.
Come back.
Come back. I just wanted to, it's kind of a kudo for you, but a lot, because I met Kevin in 2012 in Boulder, Colorado. And it was another person wanted me to go with them. And I wasn't really looking for anything, but it set me on a different path, because it was a very, very cold, very snowy night. And I never forget it, because somebody was trying to bypass doing some kind of step work, and he was like, well, you have to get the foundation down, and also about taking what you need and leave the rest. I never forgot it, and it stuck with me ever since. So that's kind of my takeaway for some of this. Take what you need and leave the rest. I've been able to tell a lot, being able to advise a lot more people is because of it. And now here I am. So
Nice.
yeah.
Yeah, I think I remember that night. We did that event at Naropa, didn't we?
Yeah, and it was no, it wasn't Naropa. It was Shambhala.
Well,
It
same
was
difference.
the Shambhala location inside
Okay.
in Boulder, in the town of Boulder.
Okay.
somewhere. And there weren't very many people, but there was a couple of people that were
Right.
trying to not. They wanted a shorter path to recovery.
Don't
yeah.
we all?
Don't we all? Yeah. But
And
you had a lot of wisdom, I felt, and I've been attracted to. Had all your books ever since. Read them, and read One Breath at a Time many times. So yeah,
Sweet.
thank you.
Fordham, were you at that night? Or did you just disappear? Looks like you just disappeared. Oh, too bad.
All right.
Thanks, Monica. Flo, hello. Nice to see you.
Hi, nice to see you. I remember reading this part in your book, and it was pretty pivotal for me because it was around year 3 of my recovery when I started reading this book specifically. I read One Breath at a Time first, and then I quickly ordered the workbook, but then I ordered this book. And this is by far my favorite of your books, because it changed my program, because around that point I was strictly in the 12 steps, and I was just having this when you were reading earlier, you said critical point, and I had come to this critical point in my recovery where I had been working my sponsors program, but it was just no longer giving me that peace or serenity any longer. And I didn't know how to mesh the two. So learning how to use the Dharma as a higher power and not foregoing the step works, because the steps got me sober. But at that point, I remember feeling guilty that I felt as if it was no longer going to keep me sober. And I was like, what can I do? So, and then I love the part about how it gave me permission to let my beliefs evolve and change.
Yeah.
And I didn't know I needed that permission. So thanks for letting me share.
Yeah, thanks, Flo. That's great. And I totally get the feeling guilty or uh-oh, and it is hard to step out of, groupthink. This is like a perennial human problem. It's like, well, everybody thinks this. I mean, that's why Buddhadasa is such a really important figure, because he stepped out of the groupthink of Thai Buddhism, and what we're doing here with the steps is stepping out of the groupthink of AA that people can lay on us and make us feel guilty or shame us or scare us. Like, oh no, if you do that, you're going to drink. It's like, that's just magical thinking. I'm going to drink if I pick up a drink. Yeah, I mean, I have to be careful of the things that lead up to that. But if what I'm doing is focused on recovery, it's not like I'm saying, oh, I don't need a program anymore. It's like, no, I'm changing the way I do that I'm still completely within that context. I'm still oriented in that way, just not the way you're thinking of it. It's like, because that's a very fear-based approach anyway. That's how cults happen. It's like, and especially it's fundamentalism. Fundamentalism, like there's one way, and I feel safe if I'm doing it the one way that they told me to do it, and it's always they told me or he told me, it's not like something that I thought of. So thank you. Yeah. Appreciate it. Jeb, hello.
Hi. Yeah, thanks for this. I've kind of rejoined you. I attended one of your retreats. It was years ago up at Shambhala Mountain Center.
Oh, yeah.
Probably, I don't know, in the 80s or early 2000s. I don't know, sometime. And I guess when your first book came out, whenever that was. Okay. But anyway, I guess I'm just kind of making a comment about, I'm really appreciating hearing this, because I have been sort of on the fringe of the Shambhala community here in Boulder. I live in Boulder, and I've attended quite a few of their retreats, and especially over the holidays. They have had a holiday retreat that I've attended for a number of years. And there's always been a little group of us that have a meeting, but it seems it's separate, and there's not a lot of, at least with this one teacher, there wasn't a lot of understanding or acceptance of that. So it's felt so compartmentalized. Anyway, it's probably time for me to reread your book and get into the things that you mentioned, because I'm feeling like I'm better able to start integrating some of this stuff. But yeah, I've been in recovery for like 30, few decades.
Wow.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nice to hear from you. I have had shall we say, a complex relationship with the Shambhala community ever since I started to become known through my writing. I've been invited to many, many different Shambhala centers, and among them the Shambhala Mountain Center, and I've always felt a conflict, because there's their founder, who was, presumably an alcoholic, died of cirrhosis in his late 40s. And yet there's this sort of culture of like denial around that, and a culture of drinking. And so, I've always sort of hoped that I could help that community move on from that or heal from that. But my last visit there didn't go well, because I did express very clearly my very strong view that, he was an alcoholic, and they decided that they didn't want teachers coming there who were disparaging. They felt disparaging their teacher. I didn't feel it was disparagement. I think Trungpa was a brilliant teacher, and that there are many brilliant teachers who have addiction problems, and that I'm not sure that I don't think I have to ignore their teaching because of their personal failings. I don't know. I mean, it's a tricky question, but I can certainly appreciate, at least try to appreciate his teachings. His teachings were helpful and important for me. But anyway, there is that. We shall see if that ever gets, in this lifetime, gets changed. I notice that things keep changing, and the way people view me keeps changing as well. So I hope to visit Boulder in my next, venturing out. One of my favorite places to drop in. So, folks, thank you for coming. Thank you for continuing your own practice. As I said, Friday night will be the 23rd of December, 2022. For those watching this in the distant future, star date, something. And so I'm going to be here for that hour. And so in the meantime, you know, as a theme, we can pick up the theme of beliefs and our attachment to beliefs for this week. It's maybe a good week to be looking at beliefs. I was just reading an article about how Protestants don't go to church on Christmas, and I just thought it was very freaky, having been raised a Catholic. I was like, what? You didn't go to church on Christmas? And apparently it's more important to open the presents. Anyway, God bless everybody, and Tiny Tim, and ghosts of Christmas present, past, and future. Don't drink or use no matter what.
Namaste.
Love one another. Love yourself.